So when we keep that in mind, how thin they're value betting and how wide they're bluffing, there are some very easy or direct exploits. And let's start with number one, which is folding bottom equity range. This is not something we want to overdo heavily, but generally against aggressive opponents where we know they put in too many chips on the flop, too many chips on the turn, on the river, and so on. Especially hands that don't make strong hands, can't really improve very much, and we're most likely going to fold to any aggression on turns and rivers. We want to be overfolding a little bit. In a spot where we assume that our opponent is probably making the mistake of putting in too many chips lightly, that's where we want to thin out our range a little bit by folding a bit more than we're supposed to. We don't want to overdo this, but this is the first idea that we just start folding a little bit of our bottom range. Now, the second idea is to increase our raise percentage. That might be a little bit counterintuitive, fighting aggression with aggression, but we want to choose the right hand class. Here, we actually want to take hands that don't want to trap. That's important, but have good characteristics to raise. So for example, a good draw. Fighting aggression with aggression is oftentimes better because we have decent equity and we generate a lot of fold equity because he's most likely value betting too thin or just bluffing too much. And against that, it's actually quite nice to play our draws aggressively sometimes. That's one approach. Another one is to increase our bluff frequency. So in spots where we think, for example, he bluffs too much, so against that second opponent where we think he's just over bluffing, that's going to be an opponent we want to be bluff raising more because he just has so much air. So especially if our hand is very vulnerable, this is now more the first type. Against opponents that value bet very thinly, we want to play them more aggressive. And we also want to value raise thinner for value. So if we know he's value betting very thinly, we want to go thinner for value ourselves. So that's something where you shouldn't be afraid. If you know that someone is just putting in too many chips too lightly, don't be afraid to raise. It's going to be a really nice tool to face that aggression. The third point I've touched on already, and this is actually essential. One of the biggest mistakes I see and that players have made against me countless of times is they just don't trap. They want to fast play every hand and want to end the hand and get in chips against me right away, and that leaves their range pretty weak and vulnerable. Strong opponents that understand this, they trap against aggressive opponents because if you know your opponent is going to put in too many chips with too many hands, they value bet too thin or they bluff way too much, you want to give him rope. You want to give him room to put in those chips. If you raise now with a hand that is just the absolute nuts and has 95% equity and he can't improve, then you just take away for him the possibility to bluff it all off into you. And that is extremely important. So the third point is probably the one I would highlight the most is give your aggressive opponent rope, trap against him, and the more he's bluffing versus thinly value betting, the more you want to trap, and the more you also want to trap some more vulnerable hands.